With the year 2020 coming to an end, it is safe to say that this year hasn't turned out the way we expected. We're in the midst of the second wave of a global pandemic, the worst public health crisis in decades. And the global GDP will unfortunately grow at the slowest pace since the Great Recession. And we ourselves, the media professionals, sometimes our credibility and responsibility are put into question. So in these challenging and difficult times, how can media inform the public and report news, tell stories in a responsible and credible manner? And how can we, journalists and media professionals, fight misinformation and disinformation? And how can media on both sides of China and Europe help with mutual understanding of the two peoples? Now, to discuss all these questions, who better to talk to than seasoned journalists and media professionals themselves? Let me introduce our guests for today. I'm very pleased to introduce to all of you Wang Lu, Deputy Director of the China Media Group's English Language Global Programming Center, and online by our European friends, Adrian Wells, Managing Director of European News Exchange, David Wingham, Head of News and TV at RTL Germany, Eric Kremer, Vice President of Distribution at France 24, and last but not least, Oscar Campillo, Director of Communications and Institutional Relations at Grupo Onsenco. Welcome to all of you guys. It's a real pleasure to have all of you with us. Director Wang, may I start with you? This has been quite a year, right?
Yes.
We have COVID-19 pandemic. We had, the trend of deglobalization picking up. Economic slowdown. What do you make of all these events, and especially its impact on the media industry that you're in?
Personally, I think the year 2020 feels different from previous years because it doesn't matter where you are, news that made international headlines were no longer about some faraway people, faraway land. The disputes between the world's two largest economies, for instance, have affected many third country governments, businesses and individuals. The fallout from the COVID-19 crisis in particular is reaching every aspect of people's lives worldwide. Nobody is immune, no business is immune. The media industry itself has been severely impacted as well. But at the same time, the pandemic also offers us an opportunity to grow the media industry. Communications platforms have proven indispensable. More than any other industry, we have kept human society functioning through the perilous times. Now, one of the most obvious trends is the growing dependence on digital media. Now, it's estimated that 60% of the world's population are online, and 2/3 of adult internet users in China told a media survey that they definitely spend way more time on social media than before during the crisis. But while providing direct access to an unprecedented amount of information and content, I think social media platforms at the same time may amplify questionable information. I'll give you an example. A report by the Australia Institute identified among tweets over 10 days, a mere 10 days, over 5,700 accounts that coordinated way more than 6,500 times to spread misinformation and disinformation about the coronavirus for either commercial or political purposes. And coordinated spreading of the China bioweapon conspiracy theory is estimated to have made more than 5 million impressions on Twitter users. So you see, while the demand for content has skyrocketed, the responsibility on our shoulders is even greater than ever. Consumer trust, according to an Edelman survey, grew significantly on traditional media. And I think in a post-pandemic era, we should do more to promote professionalism in information and communications.
Sure, sure. It is our mandate to bridge the gap of understanding, but unfortunately these days, it's not that we don't have enough information, there's too much of them, and sometimes with disinformation as well. David, if I can turn to you from Germany, what's your understanding of what's happening this year? What do you make of all these events for 2020, and especially its impact on the media industry? You know, talk to us from the vantage point of your organization.
Of course, 2020 has been a very challenging year for every business worldwide, and so it has been for the media industry. First of all, I mean, to make sure that we can still work, that all our employees are healthy, that we have to make sure that they can work in a safe work environment, and on the other hand, to make sure that we get our message across, that we can provide our users and our viewers with true information, and that we make sure that online disinformation doesn't get the point like we just heard. So it's very important for us to make sure that we as a trustworthy news organization are around, and that we make sure that online disinformation doesn't get the overhand. So, of course, it has been a challenging year for us, but it also regained a lot of trust with our viewers, because they know that when they come to us, that they get what they need. They need information, and they don't need anybody who's just trying to gain momentum.
Right. Adrian, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Traditional media brands, those that have been established for many years in the commercial or the state sector, have seen a sort of a bounce back in terms of people, you know, coming to them for news and information. And you're right also that digital does provide an opportunity. And I guess the thing that has to catch up is that the digital world is less regulated than the broadcasters' world, and you've seen platforms like fake news investing in anti-fake news investigations. You've seen Twitter flagging content that is questionable, and the traditional role of the journalist was always to sort of give both sides of the story. You know, on the one hand you have this, and on the other hand you have that, and you let people decide. Actually, that probably isn't good enough these days, because you have people actively going out to deceive, to lie, to cause disruption in the information sphere. And so the question for broadcasters and for publishers is, how do we respond to that? The vaccination issue is a classic example where science, common sense, all of the information suggests that vaccination is a good thing for our population to fight the pandemic. And yet, you've got very, very many voices on the anti-vaccination side who believe that in all sorts of conspiracy theories. And should we as broadcasters and publishers give that opinion, which we would traditionally do, and let people make up their mind? Well, probably not. Complicated area. Is that right or wrong? So this is a new area for us, and one that's going to present difficulties and challenge our traditional way of working as journalists, I think.
So Eric, what have been some of the biggest challenges the year 2020 posed for you and your network?
Well, probably the biggest challenge was to be able to keep working. Like media industry, like other sectors of the economy, has learned a lot and is still learning from this crisis. The behavior of our audience had changes. On our side, we had to quickly adapt our working habits or mode of production in order to produce and broadcast a channel 24/7 with the same level of quality. That's important to insist on that. We had to provide the same level of quality as usual. A large part of us had and still have to work remotely. I'm doing now. We change our mode of exchanging and talking to each other. It is certain that we have learned how to adapt in an emergency to a new environment, and how to continue to deliver reliable information with more limited resources as well. I believe finally that this hasty adaptation have helped us to become more efficient. And I hope that we should benefit that in the future for other crises, which I hope that will never happen, but I'm not sure of that.
Right, Oscar, in Spain, good to have you with us. How do you look at the challenges as well as opportunities, perhaps, you know, presented by COVID and the year 2020?
La pandemia
the COVID crisis has reinforced the importance of the role of media. and it's also convinced the public of the need for truthful information. But the pandemic has also forced us to work in extremely difficult circumstances. And if we add to this the financial crisis which began in 2008, 2009, then Spain is a country that has been struggling with the consequences of that over the last decade. So that has been an additional problem. And there's been a decrease in sales and advertising revenue, which has forced us to develop faster than we might otherwise have done everything to do with digital media. So at present, our potential audience, our potential readership is bigger than ever, but we have to convince our potential customers that it might be worth paying for the information they receive in order to ensure that that information is true. So we're in the process of considering the viability of putting up paywalls for access to our information. And therefore, it's extremely important that serious media organizations or media organizations that believe that they have the capacity and the duty to broadcast truthful news. It's extremely important that we all work together and cooperate as much as possible in order to achieve this goal.
Right, truthful, credible, consistent news coverage is really what is required of us. It is the mandate for all news media outlets out there. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about China-Europe relations, Director Wang. You know, I've talked to so many experts about the future of globalization. They told me they're worried, even if COVID is gone and there is a Biden administration in the U.S., globalization will not be the same or the one as we know it. So how do you see the future of globalization, and especially the role China and the European Union can play in this process, and what can we, media professionals, do to contribute to this process?
Almost all European policymakers see multilateral cooperation as essential to their interests, and I would like to say this is the same for China. Multilateralism and globalization are the common language of China and Europe. The two sides, there's no fundamental strategic conflicts between the two sides. Economic and trade ties enjoy broad prospects and great potential. We always believe that cooperation between China and Europe far outweighs competition. There's so many areas of common concern, you know, climate change, economic recovery, green development, digital economy, medicine, public health, the list goes on. I think through cooperation, China and Europe can lead a new round of globalization and provide a lot of global public goods for the benefit of the world. Now, against all of that background, I think media plays an indispensable role in transmitting accurate information timely, eliminating misunderstandings, shaping public opinion, and promoting people-to-people exchanges. We definitely should focus more on building consensus rather than amplifying our ideological and political differences. We need to be able to prove ourselves capable of forging partnerships and traveling far together despite our differences. And I personally am very glad that more and more face-to-face communications are happening between Chinese and European media companies. China Global Television Network, CGTN, for instance, and Germany's NDR are meeting annually to discuss issues facing China-European relations, bringing scholars from both sides to sit down for candid discussions. I believe that the more such viable communication platforms we open, the more likely we'll be able to keep that momentum in the post-pandemic era.
Well said. Adrian, how do you look at the role of media? Don't you think that the two peoples and the two societies can come closer together?
Well, that may be the case. I think there may be a cultural, subtle difference, I guess, from the European media sphere and the Chinese media sphere, in that very definitely those of us who work in European media see ourselves sitting to one side from that area of policy making and formation, even if it's a good thing. Although, you know, you've seen actually broadcasters maybe take a a more principled stand on things like sustainability in the environment or on anti-racist movements. There are certain positions which broadcasters and publishers advocate. But probably, those in European media wouldn't take that step further and say, okay, multilateralism is a great idea, let's promote it. There's just a difference of interpretation of how we see our role there. But having said that, of course, I think it's very important that we have exchange, we have cooperation, that we're able to travel to each other's countries. I mean, actually, that's very difficult at the moment. Very difficult for a journalist to sort of do a filming trip to China and vice versa at the moment. Something as basic and as fundamental as that is a problem right now. So I think, obviously, we have a change of leadership in the United States. We have an American president who is going to be more invested in multinational relationships, and you have explained that China is committed to multilateral relationships. So I think we'll see the media responding to that, and the meetings that perhaps haven't been so important, G7, G20, ASEAN summits, all of these meetings that perhaps have had less importance now over the last 4 years, perhaps we'll see those meetings becoming even more important, and media will follow those meetings perhaps a bit more carefully than we have done in the last 4 years.
Eric and France, how do you look at the cooperation between China and Europe in reshaping and hopefully rebuilding multilateralism?
Well, I would answer like David. I think our role is not to be involved directly into the development of bilateral relations. We are a news channel, so we focus on our mission, and we believe that our role as France Media Monde is limited to providing our audience around the world with free, independent, honest, balanced information produced by professionals. That's our mission, But doing this, we are deeply convinced that the practice of debating ideas, that freedom of speech and the values of democracy supported by France, but not only France, help to improve mutual understanding, and so that can help the bilateral relations as well.
Adrian, you run a very large news agency that produces content about China. Do you think the European media have been covering China in a fair and objective manner? And do you think, of course, the Chinese media have covered Europe in a fair and objective manner? And if not, where is room to grow coming forward?
That's a big question. And lots of different angles to it. I think, with that question, the answer is yes and no. For sure, there are, in European or Western media, definitely falls into the trap sometimes of portraying China in a sort of stereotypical way, as Director Wong was talking about, and not seeing the subtleties, not seeing the sophistication, maybe seeing a false picture at times. And of course, on the other hand, definitely European media is very aggressive about wanting to find out really what's going on, the truth about certain situations, and does it in a very aggressive way, which is sometimes runs, at a different speed to perhaps the way that domestic media in China would investigate things. So, you have controversial subjects about the origin of the virus and the timing of the origin of the virus, and these sorts of areas that are definitely controversial and difficult for each side to understand. And while that was happening, you also have these difficulties of travel being restricted because of the health crisis. So on the whole, has European media done a reasonable job? Well, I think it's done a reasonable job, but of course there have been errors. I mean, one thing that I think has been underplayed in the West is the very effective mechanisms within China and the rest of, or many Southeast Asian countries, of combating the virus. I think we've probably, in European media, underplayed that, or we haven't seen enough of the detail of how countries like China or South Korea, for example, have tackled the virus to the effect now where you don't have it anymore. And of course, we see numbers going up and up and up in Europe. And What we haven't done well enough, in my view, is to examine exactly how has that been made possible, and could that model have been applied in a European context, and would that have been acceptable to European populations? So that is something I think has been underplayed, underreported, not investigated enough, and whether that's just a product of the fact that we can't move around and do those kind of reports, I'm not sure. But those are the sorts of areas where reporting, could focus, and perhaps will focus as we see vaccine rollout develop as a big story.
Right. Eric, how do you see the importance of European news in general and your network, France 24 in particular, in shaping public perception? To what extent have your network, you think, contributed to mutual understanding of the two sides?
Well, I think it is important to say that France Media Monde is an international news media group. International is part of our DNA. There are more than 60 nationalities being represented in the company. I think it makes that the cultural and linguistic diversity within our editorial staff, and not only the editorial staff, makes possible to help mutual understanding, to foster dialogue, to build bridges between people. We have a Chinese newsroom, for our radio RFI. So I think that's important. But I do agree. But in order to promote mutual trust, it is necessary to foster dialogue and provide the key to understanding a world that is constantly moving. To achieve this, a win-win relationship involves, in my view, among other things, reciprocity in access to media of each other. Just let me give you an example. There are about 50 Chinese TV channels freely available in France through pay TV operators or satellite free-to-air. I think the situation is similar to all European countries. All channels, just France 24, whether in English or in French, is still not allowed in China. So let me see, I hope that China will issue us a license to distribute in hotel, but I'm sure it would be a win-win decision, Foster dialogue means reciprocity. I think so it's key of mutual understanding and trust.
Yeah, I appreciate your candor. Oscar, in Spain, what do you think? How have your organization, your media group, contributed to understanding of the two sides?
La receta es la misma de siempre. Well, our response has been the same as it always has. We have newspapers all over the country that have been going for over 100 years. So we've been informing the Spanish public for centuries now. And how have we been doing that? Well, truthful information and putting an emphasis on quality. And in the context of international relations, and specifically relations between Europe and China, as one of the guests mentioned earlier, it's extremely important to eliminate stereotypes. And this is something we take very seriously, and that's, again, part of delivering truthful information. Unfortunately, that task is currently much more difficult than it used to be, because there are large business conglomerates and even governments that seem determined to broadcast and publish fake news. So the way we try to combat that is by reinforcing the values that we've always held dear to us, and by, again, by cooperating with our trusted partners. It's the only way forward.
All right. Another issue I want to get to is really the fact that the line between news, journalism, and entertainment is blurring, Director Wang. When I was in the United States, I can tell you that the most popular shows are always the nightly news talk shows. Are you worried that journalism is degrading from a serious news business, journalism business, into entertainment?
Well, to entertain is actually on the list of purposes for many media organizations, especially for society during lockdown. Entertainment plays a crucial role, is key to keeping spirits up. But I think we need to be aware that we need to be careful not to let ourselves become so addicted that entertainment value becomes the most important criterion for measuring the value of all contents. news should be treated as news by generators, distributors, and consumers. I think the blurring line between news and entertainment is becoming an issue for society in China and probably elsewhere as well, particularly for the younger audiences, and some inexperienced digital editors as well, who oftentimes would mistake the popularity of an article, of a story, for credibility or accuracy or importance. For the younger generation, news dissemination and consumption is happening largely, like it or not, via social media platforms, which are yet to be effectively regulated. Measures are being taken by WeChat, YouTube, Facebook, etc., to flag, identify hoax and misinformation. But I have to say, not much is being done. Not much is being done to help us distinguish professional news reporting from light entertainment, if we can put it that way.
Yeah, definitely a challenge over there. David, how do you look at the challenges presented by the blurring of lines between journalism and entertainment? What do you think?
It definitely is a challenge, and so I think we have to draw a very clear line between entertainment and information. Our main challenge and our main task is to inform our viewers, to inform our readers. So, but of course, news can also be a little bit entertaining. I mean, especially for younger audience, you need the different approach maybe sometimes, but of course it has to be clear that information is first, and that there can't be any blurring line that makes the story just a little bit more entertaining so our viewers will watch it. So in the end, it has to be clear. Information is what news television is all about. So and if this information is presented a little bit more entertaining maybe, that's okay, but it has to come down to the fact that it's information, that it has to be true, and that we can just get to the topic because we think our viewers might like it in the end. It's not what is important to us. Of course, it's important what our viewers think, but it shouldn't be the decision-making thing for our editors in the newsroom to decide to put on a piece just because they might think that the ratings will go up because of it.
Yeah, I think that we can definitely agree on. We need to say no to sensationalism. That is one thing many of us can agree on. I want to thank all of our guests for today's fascinating discussion. We may not agree on everything, but it's very important that we keep talking like we do right now. Hopefully, I will see many of you soon, this time in person, when COVID is over. Until then, be safe, take care.